I'm standing in front of Stewart Jones Designs in Joseph, Oregon on June 12th, 2012. And I was looking for some contemporary art, and it's a little hard to find in these parts, but they sent me down here, and wolves, God help us. And I walked into this place, and first of all, you'll notice the lighting and the openness of this space. And these little pieces here are about as close as it comes. But I got started into the jewelry, and this...
If you go on our website, there's lots of photos too.
Their website has more photos, and as I went along, Miss...
I'm sorry, the woman from New York who...
And so when I came in, I was a bit startled by
Yes, we've been married 25 years.
and you are?
And I'm Catherine.
Catherine. And
Matthias, and he's Stewart Jones.
down there is... And this is Mr. Stewart Jones, and he's about to show me a device that he has that engraves silver in an incredible way. It's a hand-operated machine, and I'll show you some examples later of the work, but right now we're going to look at first the machine, and it has a series of cams on it that enable him to create concentric lines and designs like you see here of unbelievable detail and fineness. And Mr. Jones, you said you've had this about 3 years?
Yeah, about 3.5 years.
And it's hand operated, right?
Yeah, hand cranked.
And cranked.
It is, the short definition is, it's an antique Swiss rose engine. And what that translates out to is that it's an ornamental lathe. So it's a lathe, in other words, it rotates, and it does its purpose is for ornamentation rather than for machining precision parts, but it does precision ornamentation. Its initial dedication, when it was built 152 years ago, was for clock faces, for wall clocks or mantel clocks. It has a diameter capacity of about 11 inches, so it can do a circle up to 11 inches in diameter. I'm doing it mostly on small pieces. I think I go up to, from the chucks that I have, I go up to about a 3-inch diameter at this point, but I'd like to do some larger pieces over time.
Can you point to that there for me? You said the cutting face, is that?
Yeah.
And that's the actual work that you're working?
This is the cutting face right here, and that's a disc that I have in fact just cut, and I'm done with it, so I'll take it off and there, let you see what the surface is that I've done. The cutting is all done flat, and then the pieces are domed or otherwise manipulated after they've been engraved.
So do you buy the discs?
I buy the discs pre-made. I've made a couple that I needed a disc that was about as big and thick as a silver dollar, and it was easier for me to make that than to order it.
Oh.
So I just made that one myself. I've got a disc cutter. I can cast ingots and roll them out on the rolling mill and make my own stock.
Wow.
But for the thin pieces like this, for what these cost me in their labor, it's way worth it to have them make them for me than to have me make them for myself. So it cost me a few pennies per disc over the cost of the metal.
Wow.
So
that's great.
This one's
so where are
fine
these
silver.
from? Where are you getting them?
I get these from Hoover and Strong in Richmond, Virginia.
Are they made there, do you know?
Yeah, they're a complete manufacturing plant, and they utilize only and solely recycled precious metals. They don't utilize metals from any mining operations at all.
Interesting.
So, yeah, one of the things I like about them. And then they do supply stones, and all of their stones are certified conflict-free. That's another reason why I like.
What do you mean by conflict-free?
Well, diamonds in particular aren't coming from areas of the world where they are smuggled and used to pay for wars, pay for armaments. In other words, these are stones.
I see what you mean. Literally conflict then.
Literally,
Okay.
they're stones that come from areas and are certified through various fairly rigorous processes as having come from places where people are earning a fair wage and, digging of their own free will rather than with a gun at their head.
Okay.
And then the money made from the stones is not being used to finance aggression or other war-like activities. So that's one of the things you can do when you're in a business that has some onus to it potentially. I like to try and get suppliers that are more in line with what I'd like than feel like you're stuck with buying things that are doing bad where they come from and you're trying to do good with them here. I like to make them do good all the way along the track. It's as much as I can help. I mean,
Right.
Once I get outside of Wallowa County, I can't personally certify things, but the companies that I deal with, I've been doing it for a long
little
time.
bit. I mean, as
you
well
try.
know,
Yeah,
as
you
well
try.
as you know. I mean, it just.
Yeah. So this is a finished disc. I'm going to cut that center area out. And so it'll be a hole, it'll be basically a donut. And then this will be enameled.
Okay.
And then a stone of an appropriate color will be set in the center. And then this will become a pendant. It'll have a bail on it. And I've got a lot of work to do on that still.
How long have you been working on this? I mean, how long has it taken you to cut?
To cut this one
Yeah,
disc.
just do what you have on there.
Start to finish on this so far has been about a half an hour. So
That's not bad.
interminable, not bad. What I've got left is probably another 8 hours, what I've got left to do. Because once it's been cut, you have to handle it fairly carefully because you can mar the surface fairly readily if you're not careful about how you handle it. So the handling of it after the fact becomes a primary issue.
And what will you cut the center out with?
Well, I'll drill a hole, I'll take a 4/0 saw blade, I'll cut out, and I'll just very carefully cut it out by hand. And then once I've cut it out by hand, I go in there with a ball burr, which is a very circular burr, and I will very carefully dap it so that I get the circularity absolutely aligned. And I do that all just by vision, just using visual acuity. But I'll get it down to right where I want it. And then actually when I do that, I actually do that from the back so that I create a little bit of a flange, and then I take a burnisher and I burnish that flange so that there's a little tiny bit of a lip that sticks up on this side, and that acts as a fence for the enameling that I put on.
Interesting.
And I've got a couple of pieces upstairs I'll show you in a minute. We'll go up there for part of the tour.
So how did you find out about this
About
piece
this
of equipment?
machine.
What'd you call it? A rose
A
machine?
rose engine, a Swiss rose
rose.
engine. And that basically is a description that grew out of the somewhat floral rose pattern that the designs can interpret. That this particular pattern has a very rose-like look to it. And that's how it's defined. I'll switch over to a slightly different disc.
I take it you've been doing this for more than a week or so?
Yeah. And when I got the machine, the gentleman I got it from gave me a week's worth of instruction on it. And that included tearing it apart, putting it together, tearing it apart, putting it together, changing the cams. I've got 7 cams on here right now. I've got 8 more over there that I can switch out. So I've got a 15 cam variability. And then if you have the cam follower on the left side, you get a particular orientation with that cam when you're doing your cut. If you switch that follower to the right side, that reverses that orientation. So it's the same cut, but a different orientation, so effectively there's 30 variations.
When you say different orientation, though, how does that
Convex to
translate?
concave,
Oh, okay.
You know, if I were doing, you know, say on this side, I'm doing that cut, and with the cam with the follower on the left side, that cut is concave relative to the outer edge. That same cam cut would be convex relative to the outer edge if I switch the follower to the other side. And you can get into doing patterns that are all concave relative to each other, or all convex relative to each other, or concave, convex, concave, convex.
In what you showed me with your logo there, is that correct or not? Where you have a,
This is all one-sided. This is all the left-hand side.
oh, is it?
Yeah, the whole thing.
Okay,
What I did to get that variation is I just rotated. I used the phase shift. That's this knob right here. You dial that knob, this one right here, and that shifts the phase. And what that means is if you're doing your cuts, instead of being concentric to each other, when you shift the
let's go back, just backtrack for a second, back to what, I want to finish, we interrupted kind of at that point, and I do want to, that seems like an important.
Okay. Well, these outer three cuts done from the same cam and the same orientation, but the phase has been shifted from this outer three. The inner three have been, the phase was shifted
That's good.
by that much. So that's about 1/6 of the diameter of the circle the phase shift occurred.
Okay.
And that's all I did to create that variation in the
That
design.
wave pattern?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And now I've got a fresh disc in here. This is a sterling silver disc. And what I do when I start these, I always start by doing a border cut. I call it a definition cut or a border cut. And you can see as I turn the crank, I don't know if you can get in there and see that burr getting lifted up by the cutting tip. And I'm coming around, and now it'll drop off. And then I go around twice just to clean the cut out and make sure that I've got any metallic anomalies cleaned out of the way. So that's my first cut, and then I throw this lever, that drives the cutter 1 cut's width towards the center, and then I'm going to do a second border cut just to give the border a little more definition. The cutting pressure is applied by hand, and at the cutting tip there is the actual cutting blade and then a depth gauge. So I can never push the cutter all the way through, otherwise the cutter, which is tungsten carbide, would go right through this silver like butter, and you'd end up with a bunch of thin little donuts. So that's the border cut. Now I'm going to switch, actually I think I'll just leave it right here. This is a good one to start on. I back the brake off, and to sort of further the description of how the piece works, hand crank, power is supplied by this leaf spring. This spring is pushing, it's supplying power against all of this in that direction. And there's a pivot point about 2 inches down from my fingers, front and back. So all of this element is supported on a pivot. So when I turn the crank, the spring pushing this cam against the cam follower creates a wobble while the work is rotating. And if you look at that up close to where the cutter is relative to the disc, you can see the translation of that wobble visually. Now what I've got to do is bring the cutting tip right down next to that border cut that I did, so I don't end up with an unwanted gap there. That's where I want it. And now when I start the cut, you're going to see a jagged line as the work rotates, and that little cam drives that zigzag pattern. And with the very tight cams like this, you use a relatively slow speed. If you went really fast, the cam follower would actually end up jumping between high points on the cam, and you'd end up with a very skippy incomplete cut, very chattery. Now I have to go around a second time. And I use visually that phase shift knob being in the up position as my starting and stopping point. So when it comes around to up, and it's there right now. There, I've done one initial cut. Now I'm going to do a basket weave here. So this requires 2 full rotations of the phase shift. And I've got to throw this that's it. Okay, so now let's start my second cut. Now when you're dealing with a very fine line like this, it takes 3 or 4 or even 5 full rotations before the pattern starts materializing visually. Up to a certain point, it just looks like a scratchy line. But once you've established a little bit of distance with that cut, then you can start to see the actual pattern or